Exponential functions is one component that you as grade 10s, you must know this type because it is always examined in any exam that you write after this topic has been taught. So here I just want to give you the introduction to exponential functions and the whole information that you need before you go into drawing and interpretation of exponential functions. So what do we refer to as an exponential function? It is basically in the form f of x is equal to a times b to the power x plus q for grade 10s. Or you know f of x is synonymous to y, you can say y is equal to a times b to the power x plus q. So what are the characteristics of this function if it comes to drawing the graph? You see that exponential functions will always lie above or below the horizontal asymptote. Exponential functions have one asymptote, which is the horizontal asymptote. Right? It can either be a decreasing function or an increasing function, depending on the parameters that you are having. And also, don't forget that in the exponential function, you must always know that your b, what is raised to the power x, should always be greater than 0 and should not be equal to 0. So when it comes to b, you should just know that b should be greater than 0 and b should not be equal to 0. Alright, so let's look at the nature. Let's take a being equal to 1 and q being equal to 0. So that means we are reducing our function to f of x is equal to b to the power x. So we will notice that we only need to consider the conditions on b, and we have said b should be greater than 0 and b should not be equal to 0. So what we will have now, b can be greater than 1. And if b is greater than 1, we are talking something like f of x is equal to 2 to the power x. That's your b being greater than 1. What kind of a graph are you going to have? Of course, the horizontal asymptote will be y is equal to 0 because our q, we have said let's take our q to be 0. So our horizontal asymptote will be y equal to 0. So it means y equal to 0 is the x-axis, it becomes the asymptote line. So the graph will be increasing. You can see as you take the values of x is equal to 1, you get 2x, when x is 2 to the power 2, it's 4. So as x is increasing, y is increasing. So we'll end up having this graph. And here I've shown where you cut the y-axis, because when x is 0 to the power 0, any number the power 0 is equal to 1. So at this point we can determine it, whether we do have a letter or an exact number. We can still, if it's raised to the power 0, it's equal to 1. Alright? And then the other condition on b that we need to cater for, b can be between 0 and 1. That basically means that we are saying b is a fraction. So if b is a fraction, which will be 1 over something, like f of x is equal to 1 over 2 raised to the power x. Your b is a fraction that is between 0 and 1. So what kind of a graph are we going to have? We are going to have a decreasing function, because you can see that as x increases, what grows is the denominator. So it means the result becomes small. So as x will be increasing, y will be decreasing. So we end up having a decreasing function there. Alright, so we consider this as the basic graphs if we are not putting in the parameters a and q. So this is what we should just have. All the graphs will be above the asymptote line. Now let's go on to consider these other parameters a and q. Now we already know, we have studied from the other function, that the sign on a has an effect. If a is positive, well, the effect will be the same as what we have talked about here on the basic graphs. But if a is negative, then we know that it causes a reflection. The reflection can either be along the x-axis, or the reflection can either be the asymptote line, the horizontal line. So we are saying basically the sign on A determines on which side of the asymptote the graph will lie. So if A is greater than 0, we have already discussed that the graph will be above the asymptote. But if a is less than 0, that is a is negative, the graph will lie below the asymptote. And then coming to q, we already know that the effect of q is to shift the graph either up or down. That's a vertical shift. And also we need to know that q gives us the horizontal asymptote, that is y is equal to q. Alright, so let's redefine the nature, taking into cognizance the changes that are being brought by a and q. Taking b to be greater than 1 and a greater than 0. That means a is positive. The graph will be above the asymptote. The asymptote is y is equal to q, and our graph will be above. And also, because b is greater than 1, the graph will be an increasing function. And then, if we are having b being greater than 0 but less than 1, and a greater than 0, we are saying the graph will be above, because a is positive. The graph will be above the asymptote line, and it will still take the same shape as we have already discussed. Now, the changes come when a is less than 0. b is greater than 1, and a is less than 0. This is where we are saying now the graph will be below the asymptote line because of this negative, which causes a reflection when a is positive. Alright, so we can see that it's the reflection of this graph because a is now negative. And here, when a is less than 0 and b is greater than 0 but less than 1, a is less than 0, the graph should be below the asymptote, and we can see that it is a reflection of this graph along the asymptote line. So we need to understand this stuff before we go on to do the actual examples on drawing the graphs. And also, let's also relate some of the concept that is used in this topic to exponential functions. We know that 3 to the power negative 1 can be written as 1 over 3. We also know that 3 to the power negative 2, we can write it as 1 over 3 to the power 2, which can be written now simplified to 1 over 9. So, when we see f of x being equal to 2 to the power negative x, we can write it in this form. 3 to the power negative 1 is 1 over 3. So 2 to the power negative x, we can write it as 1 over 2 to the power x. So that clearly defines that this negative has an effect of giving us a fraction. So the condition on B is greater than 0 but less than 1. So we also need to understand that before we go on to graph sketching. So let's meet in lesson 2 when we do some questions applying what we have just done.